You know, sometimes it feels like time in Africa doesn't really move forward. It circles back quietly, endlessly, as if history forgot how to rest. And here we are again. Another election season in Cameroon. Another speech. Another victory for a man who has already lived through 9 American presidents. Paul Biya, 92 years old, still holding the same office he took back in 1982. That was before the internet, before smartphones, before most of today's voters were even born. The news calls it continuity. The people call it fatigue. You can see it in their faces, not anger, not surprise, just that quiet disbelief that comes when a nation realizes change is no longer part of the script. The streets of Yaoundé and Douala don't cheer anymore. They simply watch. Because in Cameroon, elections don't change leaders. They remind people how hard change still is. But somewhere not too far away across the dry Sahel winds, another voice is rising, firm, young, and fearless. Ibrahim Traoré, the 30-something leader of Burkina Faso, a soldier who stood before his people and said, "Africa will not kneel again." His words echo across the continent, stirring something old, something powerful: dignity. So tonight, as we look at these two Africas, one clinging to its past, one fighting for its future, we have to ask ourselves, why does one side of this continent still sleep under the shadow of men who refuse to let go, while the other dares to wake up? Is Paul Biya's story a lesson in endurance, or a warning about power that never ends? And could leaders like Ibrahim Traoré truly shape a new Africa? Or will the old ghosts of control drag them back into the same cycle again? Stay with me, because what's happening in Cameroon isn't just about one election. It's about the soul of a continent, and the quiet revolution that's already beginning to whisper beneath its silence. The morning of the election felt almost sacred, like a ritual the people of Cameroon had learned by heart. The sun rose slowly over Yaoundé, spilling gold light across streets that had long forgotten celebration. There were no drums, no flags, no noise of victory, only the low hum of anticipation that no one really believed in anymore. Paul Biya was seen again, walking slowly, dressed in a dark blue suit, his steps careful, deliberate. 92 years old. The cameras followed every movement, as if time itself was afraid to miss him. His wife Chantal Biya stood just behind him, her hair bright against the gray morning, her smile perfectly still. Around them, ministers clapped politely, journalists whispered, and soldiers stood like statues. It wasn't politics anymore, it was theater. He reached the ballot box, dropped his vote, and the sound, that soft clack, echoed like a closing door. For a moment, the room felt frozen, as though everyone knew they were witnessing not democracy, but its performance. Outside the walls, across the country, people watched through cracked phone screens. In small cafes and crowded markets, the whispers were the same: "He's doing it again." Hours later, the results arrived on national television. The Constitutional Council, all suits and solemn faces, read the numbers in perfect monotone. Paul Biya, 53.7%. Issa Chiroma Bakari, 35.2%. They said it like math, like certainty, like truth, carved in stone. But everyone watching knew that numbers can lie when power holds the calculator. There was no surprise, no outrage, not even denial. Just a collective exhale, that long, tired sigh of a nation too familiar with disappointment. In Douala, men leaned over motorbikes and muttered, "Same story." In the markets, women rolled their eyes and kept counting change. Even the traffic, that wild heartbeat of the city, seemed to slow down. Across social media, two worlds collided. The state-run channels declared a historic victory for peace. But ordinary Cameroonians wrote something simpler. Peace is not silence. Some posted photos of the voting lines, old men waiting under the sun, young faces already marked by disbelief. Others shared a single line: "We are still waiting for tomorrow." It's strange, isn't it? To live in a place where time stands still, where the face on the television never changes, only ages. For many Cameroonians, Paul Biya isn't even a leader anymore. He's a presence, distant, untouchable, almost spectral. He disappears for months, sometimes years, in European hotels, then reappears just long enough to remind the country he still exists. When you think about it, that's not leadership. That's history refusing to retire. But here's the part that breaks you. There are still those who hope, those who remember when Biya's name once meant promise. Teachers who believed education would bring freedom. Farmers who thought stability meant growth. Mothers who prayed that peace, even if imperfect, was better than chaos. They keep voting not because they believe in him, but because they still believe in the idea that someday, somehow, the system will remember them. Yet year after year, the cycle repeats the same ceremony, the same results, the same unspoken sadness. And in that repetition lies the quiet tragedy of Cameroon. Because when an entire nation learns to lower its expectations, when people stop waiting for change, that's when something inside a country dies long before its leader does. Still beneath that silence, something else is stirring, a low, steady murmur carried by the young, by those who've watched Ibrahim Traoré rise in Burkina Faso and wondered, why not us? The cameras may still point to Biya, but the eyes of Africa are already looking elsewhere. It began quietly, the way storms often do, with whispers. No marching bands, no speeches, just a few young men standing at a dusty corner in Douala holding cardboard signs that said, "We want truth." At first, no one paid attention. People had seen protests before, and they knew how they ended, with arrests, with bruises, with silence. But that morning, something different floated in the air. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was exhaustion finally taking shape. Within hours, more people joined. Women left their market stalls, bikers stopped their engines, students showed up with flags. The crowd grew, their voices rising soft. At first, then firm. No more lies, no more. Then came the sound that cuts through every revolution gunfire. Not warning shots, real ones. 4 people fell within minutes. Dozens ran. Smoke drifted above the roofs, curling into that hot, heavy Cameroonian sky. And just like that, the moment turned from hope to heartbreak. The government appeared on state TV that evening, stone-faced officials reading from papers, saying the same words they always do. Security forces were attacked first. But on the streets, everyone knew the truth. In Cameroon, the script never changes. The people provoke, the state protects, and the truth bleeds quietly into the dirt. Later that night, near the home of opposition leader Issa Chiroma Bakary, the chaos deepened. Witnesses said snipers were firing from rooftops, not at rebels, not at soldiers, but at civilians. Men and women who had come only to stand outside to show they still cared. Bakary went live on Facebook, his voice trembling but steady. "They are shooting civilians outside my gate," he said. Those few words spread like wildfire. Within hours, every street corner in Douala and Yaoundé buzzed with fear. People repeated his words in low voices like a prayer or a warning. "They're shooting civilians." Then came the silence, that terrible, unnatural silence that follows violence. Schools closed, shops locked up. Even civil servants, usually the most obedient, stayed home. One teacher said, "You could hear birds again because no one was talking." That's when you realize what fear really does. It doesn't make people scream. It makes them disappear. Cameroon has lived with fear for so long, it has become tradition, a quiet etiquette passed down like folklore. People learn when to lower their eyes, when to turn off the radio, when to pretend they didn't see the soldiers outside. It's not peace. It's survival. Yet this time, something is shifting. You can sense it beneath the stillness, a quiet fury, especially among the young. They've seen videos from Mali, from Niger, from Burkina Faso, young officers, proud and unafraid, standing before their people, saying, "We are free now." They watch Ibrahim Traoré speak firm, unflinching, and they can't help but wonder what that kind of courage feels like. One young man told a reporter in Douala, "We don't hate Biya. We just don't see him anymore." That line stayed with me, because that's the truth of modern tyranny, not hatred, but absence. When a leader becomes invisible to his own people, when his power exists only through fear, then the system itself becomes hollow. It holds shape, but no soul. Cameroon isn't exploding, not yet. But it's shaking. And anyone who has lived long enough knows when a nation starts to tremble quietly, something deeper than protest is waking. You can suppress a voice, but you can't kill the thought behind it. And right now, across the dusty streets and heavy air of Cameroon, that thought is spreading, whispering from one heart to another. Maybe next time, we won't be quiet. The days after the election felt like someone had pressed pause on the whole country. There were no celebrations, no horns, no songs. The air itself seemed heavier, like it carried too many unspoken words. In Yaoundé, teachers stayed home. In Douala, shopkeepers didn't bother to open their stalls. Even the traffic, the endless symphony of horns that usually fills the city, grew quiet. Cameroon was holding its breath. People looked at their phones, saw Paul Biya's face again on the news, the same stiff smile, the same speech about unity and peace, and just shook their heads. Not in anger, not even in disbelief, but in surrender. Because deep down, they already knew how this story would end. They had lived it too many times before. That's the tragedy of repetition. It turns outrage into exhaustion. One teacher, Amonga Nicodemus, said softly, "We are at the beginning of another nightmare." He didn't mean war or chaos. He meant repetition itself, the nightmare of waking up inside the same story every 5 years. Another man, Abolo Dennis, told a reporter, "Peace without justice is sleepwalking." And maybe that's what Cameroon has become, a country walking quietly through its own sleep, eyes open, hearts closed. The silence runs deep. It's generational now. Parents teach their children not to talk about politics at dinner. Neighbors change the subject when the news comes on. You survive by pretending you don't see. And yet everyone does see. They see the soldiers on corners, the ministers living in mansions, the hospitals without medicine, the classrooms without light. They see the young graduates leaving for other countries because their own has no room left for them. This isn't peace. It's paralysis. Paul Biya has ruled for 43 years. When he first took office, the world was divided by the Cold War. Most of today's voters weren't even born. Back then, people believed he was different. Educated, modern, ready to lead a new Africa. But power is a strange thing. It doesn't reveal character, it consumes it. Over the decades, Biya didn't just lead Cameroon, he became Cameroon. Every general owed him loyalty, every governor owed him silence, Every minister owed him fear, and so he built a nation that doesn't love him but can't imagine life without him. Now, at 92, Biya doesn't even need to rule. The system rules for him, a machine that feeds on dependency and dread. When he disappears for months to Switzerland, the country simply waits. They whisper, "Is he still alive?" Then one day his face reappears on television and the cycle starts again. It's not leadership anymore. It's maintenance. But here's what's quietly terrifying. There is no after. No clear successor. No strong institutions. Just a single man holding everything together by habit. And when that habit ends, Cameroon will have to face a truth it has avoided for decades, that stability without justice isn't stability at all. It's a countdown. Across the country, the young are waking up to that realization. They've grown up under one name, one face, one history that feels older than time. They've never seen a transfer of power. They've never watched their vote matter. But they've seen something else. They've seen Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, young soldiers in Mali and Niger, men who look like them saying words they've never heard from their own leaders. We decide our destiny now. And maybe that's what scares the old systems most, not the protests, not the opposition, but the idea that the people are learning to dream again. Because once a nation remembers what hope feels like, fear begins to lose its voice. From the outside, everything looks fine. Embassies tweet polite congratulations. International observers call the election peaceful. Western analysts nod at the word stability, as if it's still something to be proud of. But if you listen carefully, not to the diplomats, but to the people, you'll hear something else. A quiet heartbreak. Because the world's version of peace isn't always peace for those who have to live under it. America. Europe, the so-called guardians of democracy, have grown comfortable with double standards. As long as Cameroon keeps its ports open, keeps trade steady, and keeps the illusion of calm. The West looks the other way. They'll talk about freedom in conferences, but shake hands with fear behind closed doors. To them, Paul Biya represents stability. To his people, he represents stagnation. And yet, the winds are shifting across the continent. In Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, a man young enough to be Biya's grandson, is standing tall, saying, "We decide our destiny now." He speaks with the conviction of a generation that refuses to inherit fear. His voice carries beyond his borders, beyond the Sahel, even reaching the ears of those in Cameroon who've forgotten what courage sounds like. When you hear Traoré speak, you feel something real, the pulse of a continent waking up. But when you hear Biya, you hear an echo, the ghost of a system that should have ended long ago. And maybe that's the real story here. Africa isn't divided by language, religion, or geography. It's divided by time itself, between those who still believe power means control and those who've learned that real power is freedom. As Americans, we've seen this story too. We know what it's like when leaders outlive their purpose, when systems grow too comfortable to change. Maybe that's why this moment matters not just for Africa, but for all of us who still believe that truth once seen cannot be unseen. Because one Africa is holding on to its past, and the other, led by men like Ibrahim Traoré, is already building the future. When you look at Cameroon today, it's hard not to feel a deep ache, the kind that comes from watching history stand still while the world keeps moving. 43 years. 9 American presidents, a lifetime under one man. Paul Biya calls it unity. The people call it survival. But even silence has an expiration date. You can suppress anger. You can hide the truth, but you can't silence time. And time is beginning to whisper in Cameroon. It's whispering through the weary eyes of teachers, through the quiet defiance of market women, through the restless hope of young men scrolling through videos of Ibrahim Traoré and thinking, maybe it's our turn. Because across the border in Burkina Faso, something different is taking root. President Ibrahim Traoré speaks of sovereignty, of dignity, of an Africa that no longer kneels before foreign masters. He's young, unpolished, sometimes defiant, but he represents something Biya can no longer offer a future. And that's what terrifies the old guard. Not guns, not protests, but the idea of hope spreading faster than fear. The truth is, no system built on fear lasts forever. History has a perfect memory for those who mistake longevity for destiny. Sooner or later, every leader faces the same question. Did you lead your people forward, or did you keep them standing still? For Cameroon, the answer isn't written yet. But if the whispers grow louder, if courage outpaces fear, that answer might finally change. So tonight, I'll leave you with this. Do you think that President Ibrahim Traoré's national reform strategies are truly effective? Yet, can the movement he represents, the dream of a self-reliant Africa, truly survive in a world still run by old powers? If you believe that truth matters more than headlines, subscribe to this channel. If you feel you're one of the first to stand with a new generation of African leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, please share this video. Let others see what real change looks like. Because silence may last a long time, but it never lasts forever. And somewhere beneath the dust and the doubt, Africa is already breathing again.